Well, hello, and welcome back to another week on this crazy allotment. Yeah, it is. I know I start every week by saying how mad the weather is, but you know, this week beats them all. As I stand here now, it's well below freezing. Everything on the plot is frozen. The flooded paths are frozen. The flooded beds are frozen. My poor broad beans, I mean, short of slapping them in the face, the weather has given them a kicking this week. We've had rain solid all week. The plot has been flooded numerous times, and then it drains away and it floods back. It's 2 or 3 nights it rained all the way through the night, and yesterday morning we awoke to a light covering of snow, and it snowed all morning and then it turned to rain all afternoon. Yeah. But anyway, we're now into March, so we can start sowing. I don't think so. Anyway, yeah, this is my 8th year with this allotment, and it's my 15th year, or it might be my 16th now, as a self-employed gardener, having left the army after 30 years. And I can say without fear of contradiction that, I mean, we all know something's going on with the weather. But this winter, yeah, it's been strange. But I think one of the reason I'm not worried about the climate, and I pay no attention to scientists anymore, ever, is because since the 1960s, since I was born, they've made prediction after prediction, and every single one of them has been proved to be wrong. I don't know how they have the nerve to call themselves scientists. However, having said that, I don't know who it was, but I remember hearing a few years ago, somebody said, what will happen is we will have warmer, wetter winters. And of all the nonsense these scientists speak, that one prediction holds true. I think most of us, certainly in the UK, can agree that we are having milder, wetter winters. So yeah, anyway, that's enough about that. It's a beautiful morning. Alright, it's freezing, but it'll warm up. The big thing about today is Cheryl says, can we have a crumble at the weekend? I think we've used most of the frozen gooseberries, blackberries, apples. So she asked if we'd have some rhubarb. And I mean, I haven't looked under the forcer yet, but I know from last year I started forcing it in the January, and the first week of March I was able to get a picking. So I'm hoping, I've got to text her to let her know one way or the other, not too early, that there's some rhubarb for a crumble this evening. So I'm going to have a look at that with you, maybe a bit later, hopefully when it's warmed up. What I might find is that there's a load of shriveled up frozen stumps under there. But anyway, we're going to do that. What else am I going to do? I've carried on preparing the carrot and parsnip tubs. I've been doing that on and off all week in between the rain showers. So I'll show you what I've done there, and I've done a couple of other things. But the shed is nice and warm. In fact, as I look at it now, the roof is thawing out. It's a modestly good sunrise this morning. Not the best, but certainly not the dullest. Oh, and when I get in the shed, I'll tell you about what's happening with the site. No great news there. In fact, no good news at all, but I'll let you know. So, very welcome. Without further ado, I'm going to go and get in the shed and have another brew. Yeah, the situation with the site. Everybody's now paid their money. And I'm afraid we have no new plotters. The reason I know that is I spoke to Bridget earlier. Not earlier today, but earlier in the week, and as she said, if we had any more new plotters, they'd have been shown around at some point and they would have been up here, even though the weather is diabolical and the ground is, you know, you're sloshing about and slipping and sliding because the ground is so waterlogged. Any new plotter would have been brought up to see it and then may have done something with it, but we've had nobody. Do you know what I suspect is the landowner is always very busy telling us he's got a waiting list, I don't think he's got a waiting list. So if he doesn't renew these people's contracts, he doesn't get his money. So we've got no new plotters. So all these people who have these plots and who do absolutely nothing with them, the situation will remain the same. I'm sort of resigned to it. I've only got one more year on this site, so hopefully. So all I shall do is I shall trim the plots that border mine a little way across, just to try and reduce the amount of weeds that blow seed across my plot. But yeah, nothing to report on the plotter front, I'm afraid. That's all a bit sad. So it'll carry on being waste ground all around me. Anyway, c'est la vie. Well, the pond is frozen right now, but during the week I happened to notice that all the frog spawn is gone. It was the largest collection of frog spawn I've ever seen in the pond, and it's all gone. I think frogs eat it, don't they? Which is a really strange thing to do, but anyway, it's gone. A month or two back, I put a load of cardboard down on the fruit bush bed here, and then mulched it with chippings just to suppress the weeds. But what I've done this week is I've put a little mulch of that manure, cow muck, around each plant. I've taken care to keep it off the plant itself so that it doesn't scorch the plants, but I've dressed each one. And the rain stopped yesterday evening, so we've had a dry night. But as you can see, despite all these beds being lightly forked over to try and get the water table to drop, they're all frozen and completely waterlogged at the moment. Now, these screens at the broad beans are frozen. Now, because I've tied them in, they haven't dropped to the ground, and I'm fairly confident they'll recover. But it's a tough old world for a broad bean plant. I can see more and more of them are getting slug damage. But, they've got to survive outdoors. It is March after all. And the odd occasion I managed to get up here during the week, and in between the heavy rain showers, I have managed to fill all these carrot tubs. So each one of them has had the soil dug out, manure put in the bottom third, and then the soil weeded and put back in. So that's all 9 of those tubs there, and then these 3 here. They're all ready to go, be it carrots or parsnips, whatever I decide. But I think we're a way off that yet, because obviously with the ground being frozen now, the soil won't be warm for another 2 or 3 weeks at least. And the forecast for the next 2 weeks is solid rain, so there's going to be no change before April. That smoke is drawing me in. Well, there's a problem I didn't think I was be having this week. That's the sun in my eyes. Thought I'd do a little bit more about my modest bomb disposal experiences. It was interesting that if you read your history, during the Second World War and the bombing of London and the other major cities around the UK, it was really a game of cat and mouse between the German scientists and the British bomb disposal experts and their associated scientists. So the Germans would come up with a new kind of fuse, and the British would discover the hard way, so for example, some of them were anti-handling, so as you withdrew the fuse, they would detonate. Of course, that would kill a bomb disposal officer. And the way this worked was, I don't remember it precisely, but the Germans could adjust the fuse timing. Some of the bombs weren't designed to go bang as they dropped. Some of them, because the Germans knew quite rightly that if a bomb didn't go off and it landed in the streets of London or in a railway siding or a factory, that it would cause far more disruption just by sitting there not going bang. And so some of the fuses could be delayed, I think by up to 72 hours. Well, of course, if a fuse was delayed to go off at 72 hours, the chances are, by the time it went off, the bomb disposal officer was sat on top of it. So, you know, the casualty rates were horrendous, not just for the bomb disposal officers, but for the ARP wardens, the police officers, the public, etc. And very often, if a bomb landed in an industrial complex or somewhere, you know, like a railway station or so on, the civil authorities would say to the bomb disposal people, this is time critical. You can't wait to see if it goes off in those 72 hours. We need it gone. We need it diffused and got rid of. So the bomb disposal officer would have to do the long walk and go and deal with it and hope it didn't go bang while he was on it. And what would happen is you have a bomb disposal officer and a number two. And the bomb disposal officer could be a sergeant, a warrant officer or an officer. And the number two would be a junior NCO, a corporal. And the bomb disposal officer would say to the corporal, right, I'm going to go down to the bomb and I'm going to do A, B and C. And the corporal would make a note and off the bomb disposal officer would go and he'd do A, B and C. And if he came back, that was good. That means A, B, C is correct. If while he was doing it, it went bang, the corporal would say, right, in the future we don't do A, B and C. And that's how it was done. It was primitive. Oh, sorry, that camera moved. It was brutal, but it was effective. And so that's, you know, the way it worked. And each time the Germans come up with a different kind of fuse, the British would have to find out the hard way how it worked. And slowly this bank of knowledge was built up. So when in modern times somebody like myself goes down to a bomb, we've got all this knowledge built up through the war, through these incredibly brave men, who many of which didn't survive. And those records are still kept today. And of course the bombs, in the Second World War bombs, the Royal Engineers have responsibility for World War II or enemy munitions on British soil. The Royal Logistics Corps have a responsibility for modern terrorism, so they deal mostly with things like Northern Ireland, and the Royal Engineers deal with the historic stuff. Interestingly, the difference between the Royal Navy, because the Royal Bomb Disposal is tri-service, and so the difference between munitions at sea and on land are between the Royal Navy and the Army. And the delineation, the difference where the responsibility starts and ends, is at the high water mark. And there's a very old story, I don't know if it's true, that this strange bomb washed up on the shores of the UK somewhere, and the Army were called out to have a look at it, and they didn't know what it was. They'd never seen it before. It wasn't in any of their pamphlets. So they rolled it down the beach to below the high water mark and told somebody to call the Royal Navy. And off they went. And the Royal Navy turned up and went, blimey, never seen anything like this before. So they rolled it up the beach and said, better give the Army a ring. Now, I don't know how true that is, but it's a funny story. So, yeah, it was a terrible time. You know, those people back in the Second World War, I think they were a different species to us. They were tougher. You know, you think about all the people who suffer anxiety today. You imagine being one of them bomb disposal officers walking down, you know, or just a housewife trying to go around your business, and at the end of your street is a £500 unexploded World War II bomb. Well, you've still got to buy the groceries because you've got to feed your kids. You know, different times. Anyway, it's just a little bit of background. When I did my bomb disposal course, there was an American warrant officer on the instructor staff. He was on some kind of exchange with the American bomb disposal, so we sent an instructor out there and they sent one here. Very nice guy, very good instructor, got on well with him. But he said something quite interesting. And he said, you Brits have got it wrong. You spend tens of thousands of pounds training these warrant officers and officers to go down to a bomb. And the corporal, who doesn't have the same level of training, he sits in the safe area with his notebook or now with his computer. And if, you know, this warrant officer gets blown up, all that knowledge and expertise goes with him. He says what we do in the American army is we spend all the money on the warrant officer, and he tells the corporal what to do, and they send the corporal down. So if it goes bang, they haven't lost all the expertise. They've lost, and we all agreed on the course. I'm sorry, that's just not the British way. You cannot, you know. And I know from 30 years in the military, it was a very rare person who would send a junior NCO or a corporal or a private to do something he wasn't prepared to do himself. You know, you can't. You know, it's just not British. So I told you a little bit about, you know, very briefly about the history. I'm no historian, but I do find it fascinating. The Second World War and the cat and mouse between the British and the Germans, different times. So fast forward to modern times, and in the 1990s I was, as I've said before, I was a warrant officer in the bomb disposal unit, and you spent a week on call as the duty bomb disposal officer, and at the time then you had pagers, and when you started the duty you went and took over the Land Rover, which had very distinctive red wings which denoted bomb disposal, and obviously a blue light. And you took over the vehicle because it had all the very highly technical kit in it, had the and you had to sign for the explosives that you carried, so that if you had to detonate something. One of the most common call-outs for bomb disposal is these very small incendiary devices. The Germans dropped large munitions full of hundreds and thousands of these little incendiary bombs that were made of magnesium and full of thermite, and all they were designed to do was land on the roof of houses and, you know, buildings of all description, and they would catch fire and they would burn through the roof into the space, you know, between the roof and the building, and catch fire and set fire to London, Coventry, Sheffield, Plymouth, wherever they went. And they were very effective. Well, of course, after an air raid the night before, you know, some of these people would come out into their back gardens and they'd find a small incendiary bomb that hadn't gone off, sat on their back garden lawn. And more often than not, if it was an old chap who had his little allotment out in the back garden, he'd think, rather than fuss about calling the police and messing everyone around and inconveniencing himself, he just put it in his garden shed, tucked it away out of the way and forgot about it. Of course, years later when that old fella died, you know, family members would go in the shed to clear it out and find this incendiary device. So it was one of the most common call-outs that you had. And more often than not, what would happen was you, as the bomb disposal officer on duty, you'd take it to a field a few hundred metres away, put a tiny little bit of explosives on it, press the button and bang, it's gone, dealt with. So that's why you carried explosives. Well, I was on duty on a particular week, and there was a building site in Maidstone, and they were digging a sewer ditch about 15 feet deep to put these large concrete sewer pipes in for a new housing estate, and they were building it on an old Second World War airfield, because the control tower, you know, the circular tower with the walk around, was still there, a couple of 100 metres away. More of that later. And as is quite common in the UK today, as the digger was digging this 15-foot ditch, he hit a Second World War 500-pound bomb, and it dropped from about 4 feet down into the 15-foot ditch and landed. And of course everybody thought, crikey, and they quite rightly moved out of the way, called the police. The police came in and they called the bomb disposal. So I'm sat up in Carver Barracks near Saffron Walden, and the pager goes off and off I go in the Land Rover. Well, on the way down the M11 and around the M25 towards Maidstone, you've got to go over the Dartford Bridge. Well, the Dartford Bridge is just a terrible place to try and get through. So I had to ring the police, and it was very well organised. The civil authorities are very well versed in all this. A police car met us on the ramp up to the bridge and escorted me through the traffic at high speed. I wasn't driving, my number 2, the corporal, was driving. I'm busy looking through my notes, trying to remember what to do. And I can always remember glancing up at the second what happened was the police drove us through at about 60 mile an hour through this traffic. He could have gone quicker, but we were in a Land Rover. And they had the toll booth, the barrier up, and we went through this toll booth at 60 miles an hour, which doesn't sound very fast, but those toll booths are only just narrow enough for a car to go through. Well, luckily the corporal knew what he was doing, and I looked up just as we went through this gap, and ooh, I think I might have sworn. Anyway, the police car moved out of the way, and on we went, and we arrived in Maidstone. Now, when you do the course, they brief you that the civil authorities, the council, the police, all the agencies involved will turn up, they will know what to do, and so on and so forth. And of course, being cynical squaddies, we went, yeah, all right, civvies. No chance of that happening. So we got there, and there was a porter cabin far enough away from the bomb that we could use. The police, the army, and the council all met there to discuss what was going to happen. And this lady walked in, I'll never forget her. She was in her 60s, I'm guessing. And she had a big roll of paper under her arm and a large thermos flask thing with a handle on the top. And she came in through the door and she introduced herself, and I regret I can't remember her name. And on this table she laid out all these maps. There were Ordnance Survey maps, there were maps of the buildings, you know, very brief sort of digital drawings. And on each of these maps she had drawn circles going out every 100 metres on the maps. And that was the correct thing to do, because when you look at it was a £500 bomb, and I think, you know, it was, you know, in the 1990s, a long time ago. I think no human beings were allowed in the first 300 metres diameter out from the bomb. I think the next 100 or 200 metres was all buildings had to have all their windows open. And you open windows so that the blast goes through the open windows and doors and out the other side of the building. It actually goes through the blast. If you shut the doors and windows, it blows them out. So, yeah, she was incredibly well organised, and I thanked her and I said, right, you know, you need to evacuate everyone out to this point and open all the doors and windows at this point, and so on and so forth. And she had this big thermos flask. She said, I've brought this in the meantime, but I've got more coming. And then this minibus turned up with, it looked like something ready for a wedding. Trays of sandwiches and sausage rolls and sausages with, you know, it was, I've never seen anything like it. There weren't enough people there to eat all this food, because of course the police, myself and all these other people had jobs to do. But yeah, and sure enough, these big containers of coffee and tea, we brought a lorry down of guys, about 10 or 20 guys, and they're there to fill sandbags, dig ditches, whatever I need doing in the way of manual labour. I think they gave that food a good hiding. So I discussed it with the police, and I went down to the bomb, and we used a thing called a microphone stethoscope. The worry is that the bomb, as it's dropped, has set the fuse ticking again. That's what you're concerned about. So you put this stethoscope on the casing of the bomb and you go through various frequencies trying to listen for a tick. Anyway, thankfully there wasn't one. And in discussion, there's a person called the Senior EOD Commander. Now, I was a warrant officer. This chap, the Senior EOD Commander, was a major. Brilliant idea. He's there to discuss with the police and liaise. He's there to talk to the press, because there was great press interest. They had to evacuate a large secondary school. They had to evacuate several factories, and there was a golf course fairly nearby. But the golfers carried on, and when I spoke to the silver commander, the police officer, they're bronze, gold and silver. This one was a silver. He said, we've advised them to leave, but we can't make them leave. So these guys carried on playing golf through the whole thing. Anyway, long story, I know I'm waffling, but I went down to the bomb and came back, and I'm deciding what to do, speaking to the Senior EOD Commander, who's another qualified bomb disposal officer. And the police approached us and said, look, we cannot afford, with the amount of evacuating we've had to do here, this has got to be over as soon as possible. Can you just blow it up? Well, we spoke to the building site manager and said, look, if we blow this up, what's the problem for you. And he said, no problem at all, we'll just re-dig the ditch. So that was what was agreed, that we would blow the bomb up. So I went down to the bomb and I placed a charge. It's called the ogive, the curved part at the front of the bomb, which is where the fuse and the majority of the munitions are, the high explosives. And we placed I placed a charge on that, put a detonator in it, and the police cordon made sure there was nobody else there. And I went and positioned myself under the cover of this control tower, because of course it was in a 15-foot ditch, which meant there was going to be no blast damage going out, but the blast would go up, and of course what goes up has to come back down. So I was concerned about shrapnel. So I placed myself under this control tower, and at the predetermined time pressed the button, and I would say I was about 100 metres away, and wow, what a bang, what a bang. And of course, sure enough, this stuff went up into the air and then it started coming back down. And as I'd pressed the button and I sort of braced myself, I looked across at this golf course. I mean, they were a long way off. Everybody flattened on the ground. Serves them right for not evacuating. So yeah, it was quite interesting. And when I was walking back, there was, all the cameras were there with the senior EOD commander. They'd been, I'd said, right, we can collapse the cordon. I'd checked that there was nothing left. There was nothing bigger than a 50p piece left, and it had obviously collapsed the trench. And the senior EOD commander was speaking to all the cameras. So I stood behind a conifer tree out the way, waiting for. I didn't want to speak to TVs. I stood there thinking to myself, you've just dealt with a 500-pound Second World War bomb, and you're scared of a few cameras. What kind of a man are you? But yeah, I stayed out the way till the cameras had gone. But that was, an interesting experience. I had other call-outs, but that was the biggest. And luckily we got to make it go bang. Anyway, mildly interesting. Well, as the sun comes up, there's really not a lot to be done here today. I might do a bit on I've got 4 tubs behind the shed that I shall grow carrots or parsnips in, and I haven't topped them up yet. So I might do that today, but I am a little concerned that because the ground at the back is so waterlogged, all I'm going to do is make a god-awful mess. But I'll see how the weather develops. But of course, my main effort, although there's not a lot of it, is at home, in the greenhouse and in the house. So let's have a very brief look at what I'm sowing and growing at home. So in the conservatory, I've got my leeks and my main crop potatoes. And as I speak, you can hear the sleet and rain on the roof. We've had snow this morning. There's still some on the roof of the greenhouse. My plum tree is in blossom. A thoroughly miserable day. Well, as the snow continues to fall, March, snow. Yeah, windowsill in the kitchen is being used, so that's peppers, tomatoes, celery, more celery and lettuce. And therein lies the problem with the propagator, I think. The lettuce is all grown as leggy as the tomatoes. Still, I'm learning. Not much going on in the greenhouse. Got a few overwintering geraniums. I was trying to warm some soil for my peas, but it's freezing today, so that's not working. Some basil I grew on that propagator. Whether that will survive these cold temperatures, I'm not sure. And then most of everything else is overwintered brassicas. Trying to grow some sweet peas, but that's not working either. So it's all very slow. Well, I think the weather gods have looked at this allotment and thought, he's had snow, he's had storm force winds, he's had torrential rain. What have we missed? Ah, I know, fog. So 10 minutes ago I was blinded by the sun. and now I'm completely entrapped inside a heavy fog. It's just the weather that keeps on giving. Well, I'm sat in my shed having a brew, thinking how little there is for me to do. I'm a poet. And I've made a fairly major decision. I'm fed up sloshing about, waiting for these beds to dry out. So I'm going to put in a drainage ditch. I don't know if a camera can even pick it out in this fog. Down the edge of these beds, all the way down to here, and then across here, feeding out into that ditch there. I've got enough guttering downpipe to put pipes under the paths. The ditch will only be very, very narrow, so it's not taking anything away significantly from each of those beds, and it just may help. I mean, you could argue I'm doing this a bit late in the winter. It's now March as we head into spring, but like I say, the forecast has no let up in the rain until, I mean, I've looked as far ahead as 15th of March and it's rain every day. So I think I'll give that a go. I'm not going to finish it today, obviously, but I'm going to make a start and just see how I get on. Decision made. I can do the same on that side. It gets a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to give it a go and we'll see how we get on. Well, I haven't got this next pipe in, but it's all shifting. Yep, it's shifting. All flowing from the beds on the plot. The only problem is that ditch isn't deep enough to get the flow moving, so I need to dig that out a bit. Well, the mist has cleared, the sun has come out. It's a beautiful morning. And I've finished the drainage ditch on this side. So let me show you. It starts at this bed here, there's nothing above here. Excuse my shadow. So I've dug that ditch there to start collecting it. It goes under here. You can see the pipe comes out there. It runs all the way down the side of this bed, which is already draining the standing water. And it's only been in about an hour. Again, a piece of pipe goes under this path. I don't know if you can see, but there's a very slight flow there. Under here, where it turns at 90 degrees, goes under here, runs down here. Now at this pipe here I've had to raise it slightly, otherwise all the water running down the side of the plot is going to come in through here. There has to be a higher point for it to run down. So this water's going to be retained here, I think. And then I've dug this out, comes out here. I can step over. Yeah, it is actually flowing out of there very, very steadily. I've dug this out, and again there's a gentle flow, and it's away. Right, let's see what we've got. Fantastic. Well, I shall leave that to develop normally. And that's my first crop of the year. Very happy with that. Oh well, from thinking I wouldn't have anything to do and what am I going to do with myself, I've been really busy. I'm worn out. I'm very pleased with what I managed today. Not really anything to do with growing crops, but the plot looks better for it and the water is visibly draining. So, and very happy with the rhubarb. That was genuinely the first time I'd looked at it with you, so very happy that forcing it works. That big barrel definitely does the job. So yeah, first crop of the year. Let's look forward to many more. And although the plot is still waterlogged, oh, that's the boss. Yeah, although the plot is still waterlogged, you've seen I've got some stuff coming on at home, and now that it's March, tomorrow morning I think is down around 0, the same as this morning was, but thereafter the nighttime temperatures pick up to something like 6 to 7 degrees. So I will really ramp up the seed sowing from maybe next weekend. Things like the peas, beetroot, spring onions, lettuces, you know, the list is endless. So although there's no change in the forecast of the weather, and it's proving a real challenge, I'm optimistic that I can get things moving, and at some point the weather has to change and then the ground will dry up and I can start to get things in the ground. I mean, I've got all those brassicas in the greenhouse ready to go in the ground when it dries up. So I'm very happy with the way things are going. I can't change the weather. I've got to work around it. I hope you're having success with your plot or your back garden. And all being well, I shall be around next weekend, by which time I will have finished the second irrigation ditch, guaranteed. So, whatever you're doing this week, have a good week, and I will see you next weekend. Take care, look after yourselves. Bye for now.